Hi there. If you heard my lesson earlier this week, you heard me talk about arrangement in some pretty general terms. I talked about having a good intro, body, and conclusion structure and some strategies for how to do that. You also heard me talk about how to prepare a good preparation outline and translate that into a good speaking outline. And those are really important parts of arrangement, but I have a little bit more for you, and the reason for that is I've had a lot of students in the past tell me that arrangement is one of their weaker canons, if not their weakest canon. I've also seen a lot of students deliver speeches that I think would be a lot more effective and a lot more efficient if they were pretty well organized. So I'm going to run through some details, and if you think arrangement is one of your stronger categories, you probably are pretty good with it already, and some of this may be repetition for you, but for others, I think this can be really a helpful way to prepare your speeches. So let's just talk a little bit broadly about why organize your speeches in the first place. You've probably seen some speeches in the past that were not very well organized, and it's usually a pretty painful experience to sit through. So you probably have some of your own ideas for why organize things in the first place. I've just got a couple of my own, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with them, because we can talk all day about good reasons to organize. But the first reason is that people really generally like predictability. Yes, good speeches include some element of surprise, and you want to teach your audience things that they don't already know. But most of the time, people like to have a good sense of direction. They like to know where a speech is headed, and not to be too surprised by what the content of the speech is going to be. They're more interested in being surprised by the details of the speech. Second thing is that arrangement makes your speech easy to follow. Sometimes that's just for your audience. It makes it easier because they're not in your own head and helps them figure out what it is you're thinking and why you put things in the right order. But it also helps for yourself. Arrangement, I think, is really closely tied to memory. If you have things that are pretty well organized, it makes it easier to practice and remember where those things are. So having a really good, strong sense of arrangement can be really helpful later on if memory is also one of your weaker canons. It can help you figure out where you are in your speech and why you're at that place and where you're headed next. A third thing that good arrangement does is it helps reinforce your meaning and makes your message a little bit stronger. There's a lot of different organizational patterns that are pretty common in public speaking, and you'll want to pick one of those patterns and stick with it because it really helps your audience follow along. People kind of expect these different organizational patterns, and they're really helpful for getting your audience to remember what it is you're saying and structuring your message in a way that's really going to resonate with your audience. The last reason to organize is really that speeches are very different from reading. I usually like to ask, what are the similarities and what are the differences between a speech and an essay? And there are a lot of things that they have in common. I mean, the first three canons I've always referred to as the written canons, and the last two are what I refer to as the oral canons. So there's a lot of similarities there. But when you sit down and listen to a speech, it's a little bit different from reading a book or reading an essay. Some of you have probably had the experience of sitting down and reading a book or a magazine or a newspaper, and your eyes are following along on the page, and you've been reading for 5 or 10 minutes, and you realize, hey, wait a minute. My eyes have been following on the page, but I haven't absorbed anything in the last, 2 or 3 minutes, and I maybe have to go back and reread that stuff. When you're reading a text, it's pretty easy to just flip backwards and reread that kind of stuff. When you're watching a speech, especially when you're watching a live speech, you don't really have that option to rewind and look back and figure out what you missed. Speeches are easy to tune out of, and so the better organization you have, the more your audience is likely to stay tuned in and not have to feel like they missed out on something. So those are just a couple of reasons why organization is really important. As you sit down to structure your speech, then, I really want you to think about how it's different from an essay. One of the main things that makes speaking different is it really emphasizes, instead of thinking about things in paragraph format, instead thinking of things in terms of main points and subpoints. Your main points are what you really want your audience to remember, and they're a little bit more general. They're kind of 2 or 3 main points in a short speech like the ones you're going to have for this class. You probably don't want to have too many more than that. Your subpoints are where you're going to provide all the details that support those main points. And so, a good essay will have separate main points as well, but it doesn't necessarily make a hierarchy of main points and subpoints and sub-subpoints. So as you're thinking about your speech, I don't want you to write in paragraphs because it's pretty easy with a paragraph to think that the paragraph is more coherent than it actually is. Sometimes you just sit down and you write, 100 words at a time and you think it's organized really well, and then you find maybe it is for an essay, but again, for that speech audience, it might not be very well organized. So I want you to be thinking about how you're going to distinguish between your main points and your subpoints. Now, you already use this kind of thinking a lot of the time. What really distinguishes a main point from a subpoint is how specific the details are. So if you take a look at what I've pulled up on the left here, you might have no idea what those letters are, or if you sit with them for a second, you might be able to figure it out. This is the taxonomy of different species of plants and animals and everything else, every living organism on the planet. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I had to memorize that in like 10th grade, and it still stuck with me, in part because it moves from general to specific. You've probably heard that the last two of these, the genus and the species, are what give plants and animals and other organisms their names. So Homo sapien is genus and species, right? You use this kind of broad to more specific language and structure all the time. Now, as you're thinking and moving up and down on different taxonomy levels, what you can be thinking of is also where those things belong in a speech. So basically, your intro and conclusion should be more general than the body, and so that's where you get to have a little bit more fun, and that's what I talked about a little bit earlier this week. You can have a little fun and play around with your intro and conclusion. They don't necessarily include a lot of those specific details. Additionally, your main points should be more general than your subpoints. Your subpoints are going to be where you get into the really specific information. So if you're giving an informative speech, let's say you're giving a how-to guide to a recipe that you want to have, your main points are probably going to be the preparation, and then like mixing the ingredients and getting the oven ready and then leaving it to bake and then letting it sit. Those are your main points. The subpoints are going to be much more specific within that. They're going to have all of the what to add when and how what temperature to turn the oven to and things like that. Those are more specific. If you're giving a persuasive speech, you're going to have your arguments as your main points, and your evidence and reasoning are going to be your subpoints, and that's where you're going to provide what it is that really proves to your audience that your side is accurate. But what they're more likely to remember is not those little details in the subpoints, but probably the main arguments that you're crafting. So you want to be thinking all the time about where things fit in the speech. You want to be thinking on a macro level of how well each main point fits with the other main points and where it belongs. And you want to be thinking on a micro level, even down to the sentence and word choice and syntax level of, do these words or sentences belong with the words or sentences directly before and after them? When you're not sure, I'd encourage you to see what you can add or delete or rearrange in order to make your points a little bit clearer and make them flow a little bit better. It's really common for a lot of students to just kind of word vomit on a page and think it's well organized and leave it at that. And even some seasoned speakers do that. I think it's really helpful to be comfortable moving ideas around once you have them. So I'll tell you what I usually do when I sit down to write big projects is I'll write a first draft of it. I'll print it out and I'll literally cut it up with scissors, sentence by sentence or paragraph by paragraph, and sit on my living room floor at my kitchen table and just rearrange them until I'm satisfied with the order. And sometimes you'll find that you'll have new ideas spring up or things that you thought fit together that maybe don't fit together as well as you thought they did. So I just want you to get comfortable moving things around. That's probably the biggest part of arrangement, is not getting locked into an order. Now, some of you, if you are more visual learners, might not like the outline format as it's described with, everything in this kind of setup, main point, subpoint, sub-subpoint. If you don't like that layout on the page, another way of thinking about it is to think about it visually. That if you move top to bottom, it gets more specific, so main points and subpoints and sub-subpoints. That's another way of reorganizing this. There are a couple of tools that you can use online. One of my favorite ones is called Bubble. If any of you want to use that, you basically just type your ideas in And then you get to decide if they're main points or subpoints, and you can actually move them around on the page, and it'll save them for you. I actually use that tool to work on my master's thesis and parts of my dissertation. And so it can be really helpful to have a visual representation that's more picture-oriented instead of list-oriented. As you think about your main points, there's a couple of things you want to pay attention to. The first is that you don't want to have too many main points. When you do, usually your audience has a hard time following it. To give you a better sense of this, if you're giving, let's say, a 7-minute speech, and you have an intro and a conclusion that are roughly about a minute each, that leaves you 5 minutes for everything else that you want to cover. And I've seen students try to cram in 5 or more main points in those 5 minutes. It's actually better to think in terms of depth than it is to think in terms of breadth. That is, you want to have fewer main points and more detail, rather than having a lot of main points and only skimming the surface of each one. So in most of your speeches in this class, with the exception of your deliberation, you're probably only going to have room for 2 or 3 or probably at the most 4 main points. Even in an hour-long presentation, you probably don't want to have too many main ideas. You probably want to have, 5, 6, maybe 7 or 8, right? You don't want to overload your audience, or they have a hard time keeping track of what it is you're talking about. They probably already have a surface-level idea of what you're talking about. So the more detail you can provide, the better. And that really goes with depth rather than breadth, like I said. Once you figure out how many main points you have, you really want to separate them out as well. Sometimes it's common for students to think that 2 ideas belong in the same main point. I'd really encourage you to keep each main idea down to 1 main point. So let's say you want to give a speech on healthy living. You might think that diet and exercise are parts of healthy living. Some people might put those as part of the same main point in terms of what it takes to maintain a healthy weight. I would encourage you still to separate those out, because there are specific things related to diet and specific things related to exercise. And if you try to cram them together, it gets a little bit murky. So really try to keep 1 idea for each main point that you have. I usually mark this by saying there's an idea shift, that you don't even realize it, but halfway through what you're talking about, you've changed ideas. This is much more common when people try to write their speeches as essays. They just kind of word vomit, like I said, 100 or 200 words, and they don't even realize that they've switched topics halfway through a main point. So you really want to be careful to separate those out. Third thing to think about is coherence, and that has to do with whether your main points make sense. Coherence blurs a little bit with the third canon of style, and that your language choices are going to influence this as well. But it also means that you want to make sure that within your main points, your subpoints are supporting those main points, and that you're able to demonstrate that they all fit together and that they all are giving roughly the same message. Closely related to that is unity. So beyond the main point level, how well do all the parts of your speech fit well together? Do they follow the same organizational pattern? Do they flow well from one point to the next main point? Really, again, on a macro level and on a micro level, you want to pay attention to how well your ideas flow, and wherever you're not sure, get comfortable rearranging, get comfortable adding or deleting things, get comfortable modifying your language to make it a little bit clearer and make it a little bit more consistent. Balance is another one that a lot of students throw off. It's what happens when you have a 7-minute speech and you've chopped off the intro and conclusion, and in the 5 minutes that are left, you spend 4 of them on one main point and a minute on the other 2 points combined. It's off balance when one point gets more coverage or more detail or more energy and enthusiasm than the other main points. So you want to try with your main points, if you have 3 of them, make sure you spend equal time and energy talking about all 3 of them, or your audience is going to wonder why you included 1 or 2 of them if they don't get as much attention. Last but not least, anytime you move down from more general to more specific, make sure you have at least 2 things each time you make that distinction. And the reason for that is that sometimes you think that you have ideas that are on different levels that are actually on the same level, and so they're off balance that way. Or sometimes it's the opposite, that you think you have them on different levels and they're really on the same level. So every time that you get more specific, there's usually 2 or more things that are more specific than the older category. So anytime you're moving from main points to subpoints or subpoints to sub-subpoints, make sure that you have at least two of the things. Otherwise, you might not have balance, and you might have to rearrange some things as well. Another piece of this that helps with unity and helps with coherence is all of these organizational patterns. These are common ways that people will present a speech. They're common ways of telling a story, whatever that story may be. Maybe that story is past, present, future, and so it's chronological. Maybe it's spatial, and you're giving a geography of a place, and you move around different regions. Cause and effect you've seen, comparison, contrast, problem, solution. These are all pretty common ways of presenting as well. You're probably going to use problem solutions structure for your deliberations, for instance. If you don't have any of those, what you probably have is topical organization. That just means that you have related ideas that are shared, like apples and oranges and bananas are all different kinds of fruit. Whatever your organizational pattern is, you probably want to choose one for your speech, and you probably want to be consistent with that one. If you are jumping around from time to space, or you provide cause and effect and you spend way more time on the cause than you do on the effect, that could be a problem, right? And so these are all just different strategies for you to think through what's weaving my speech together, what's that common thread that's making it united. Another thing that's really helpful as you're thinking about main points and subpoints is to use a consistent symbols and indentation pattern. I use the one that's pretty common in standard business meetings. So anytime you've had a meeting that's met with Robert's Rules of Order and it's really formal, this is the system that people generally use, where main points are in Roman numerals, subpoints are in capital letters, sub-subpoints are in Arabic numerals, sub-sub-subpoints are in lowercase letters. I'm going to make some templates for you to help you think through your major speeches for this class, and I will probably use this format. You don't necessarily have to use this format, but the reason for having a consistent pattern is that it helps you translate from that preparation outline to that speaking outline. So if you go back and watch my earlier arrangement video, I've done that with the note cards that you saw there. Everything is in Roman numerals, so maybe I know that I was on 2A1, and then I got stuck and I got a little flustered, and I'm like, okay, I know I read 2A1, I don't remember reading 2A2, so I'm probably on 2A2. And that's where you'll go to next. You don't have to use this system if you don't like it. A lot of students will tell me that they find bullet points more effective, and they have, the black filled in bullet points, and then the white not filled in bullet points, and different levels of that. But really what you want to have is a consistent system that you can take everything from your preparation outline and cut it down into keywords to translate it into your speaking outline. And then if you get stuck in your speaking outline, you have a better sense of where you are. The last bit of information that I have for you on consistency is to make sure that you have good transitions from one point to the next. Most of the time when you're using transitions, they'll be full sentences, and you'll indicate in some way that you're wrapping up one point and moving on to the next point. Sometimes you don't have full sentences, you just have brief markers like first, second, and third are pretty common. This is called signposting. And signposting is more common in speeches than it is in essays. Basically what it is like holding up different symbols. You're not actually holding them up, but you can picture someone directing traffic or something like that you want your audience to pay attention. Signposting is words and short phrases that you can use to indicate where you are in your speech. It's really helpful in speech because, again, people have a tendency to tune out at various places. And if you say third, people are wondering, what were 1 and 2? Maybe I missed 1 and 2. Well, I should probably pay attention to 3, 4, and 5, and then I can get 1 and 2 later. It's just another way to get your audience to pay more attention in your speech. And so you don't necessarily always use signposting in essays, but it's really important in your speeches to try and bring your audience back to you as many times as you can because people have short attention spans and it's pretty easy for them to tune out. There's two other parts of transitions or connectives that are really helpful. They're closely related, and I like to think of them as ways of setting up and resolving each of your main points. So an internal preview is kind of like a mini thesis for your main point. It's a short phrase or usually a full sentence that a lot of people will just use as their main point to indicate what it is they're going to be talking about for that main point. So it's kind of a thesis and preview of what's coming there. A lot of people do that part pretty well. What a lot of people don't do so well is the internal summary. I think the internal summary is what transitions good writers to great writers a lot of the time. Internal summaries are kind of like mini conclusions for your main point. A lot of early speakers, a lot of seasoned speakers will lay out their ideas and they'll have a main point and they'll have a couple of subpoints, and then they'll just move on without tying the subpoints together. And I think that's a mistake for a couple of reasons. Again, one reason is that you want to remind your audience of the key takeaways whenever you can. More importantly, what internal summaries do is help you move from description to analysis. Now, what do I mean by that? Description is usually the who, the what, the where, the when, specific details that help support that main point and help back up that main point. Analysis is usually more about the why and the how and the so what. So not just what are all the details and what's all the data that you need to buy my main point, but how do I tie that all together? What does it mean and why does it matter? A lot of speakers expect audiences to be in their own head, that is the speaker's head, and to just get it. They're like, I don't have to spell it out for you, you're smart people, you can figure it out. I think sometimes speakers give their audiences a little bit too much credit. Audiences are not mind readers, and even if they were, it's still helpful to remind them specifically what do you mean and what do you want them to take away from this main point. So always be asking yourself at the end of a main point, what's the so what question here? What does it matter? Why should my audience care about this? Why do I want my audience to remember this? Try to answer that explicitly rather than just trying to leave it for your audience to guess. So again, think of internal previews and internal summaries as mini intros and conclusions for your main points. I think that's a really helpful way of structuring, so not just your speech as a whole has an intro, body, and conclusion, but every part of your speech has an intro, body, and conclusion, if that makes sense. One other piece of advice that I have for you, sometimes students tell me, well, I don't know a whole lot of ways to express those transitions creatively. You might find yourself repeating the same transition word over and over and over again, or you might feel like you don't have the word to express what it is you want to say. I found this awesome handout a few years ago that I love, and I've shared with students, and I've had students tell me that they found it really helpful. I sat with it while I was writing my master's thesis and my dissertation. It's a list of not just transition words and phrases, but also a list of the relationships that writers and speakers are trying to express when they move from one point to another. So it's helpful because it'll give you those words and phrases that you may not be able to think of on your own, or you may get tired of using the same one over and over again. But I think it's also helpful for thinking through, do these parts really fit together? What is the relationship between main point 2 and main point 3? Have I expressed that relationship clearly? And so this handout that I have, it's going to be in the useful materials folder on Blackboard. On the left side of the page, it'll have all of those different relationships, cause and effect, addition, conclusion, and then it'll have words and phrases to help you with those transitions. I really encourage you to use that if it's something that you struggle with. I think it's another one of those things that just adds extra icing on the cake and moves good writers to become great writers. So that's really all I have for you in terms of content. If any of you feel like you want some extra practice with arrangement, I usually do this in-class activity where I've written a couple of sample outlines. And so I've put together a couple sample outlines. They have a central idea and 3 main points, and within each of those 3 main points it has 2 subpoints. And what I want you to do is to practice taking that central idea that's a thesis and a preview, that is, it has an argument that it's making of some kind or some kind of overall message, but it also tells you where things belong in the speech. I want you to take that central idea and try to arrange the speech so that it makes sense in a logical way. So I've given you the outline out of order, and you can actually physically cut up the page into separate sentences and then sit and do exactly what I told you to do. Cut them up, rearrange them on your living room table, and see if they make sense in the order that they're in. I think there is more or less a right way to arrange all of them. There might be some room for, well, that one goes first or that one goes second. Again, I see public speaking as more of an art than a science, and so it's not necessarily that there's a right or wrong answer, but I think there are better and worse ways of arranging these. And so if you want to play around with that, I'll put that on Blackboard for you as well. And if you want to test it out, if you want to ask me if you've arranged them well, then send them my way and we'll have a conversation. So that's what I have for you. Don't be too intimidated by arrangement. It's something that takes some work, and it's, again, more of an art than a science. But I think we can all agree that there are some good speeches that are well composed, and there are bad speeches that are not very well composed. So do your best with what you can, and anytime in your drafting process at any of the 5 canons, but certainly with arrangement, seek out my help.